Awesome.
All right. So our first order of business is adopting the hybrid, correct?
Participation policy. is
Yes.
first. Okay. Richie, do you want to go over the remote participation policy?
I'll do it. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Jay. So I think it's ironic that that I've always been in favor of coming back to in-person meetings, and then the first chance we have to have an in-person meeting, I'm participating remotely. But in any event, what we have on the table is something that we have discussed, I think, since April. But it's the adoption of essentially two important policies, but three kind of all rolled into the one. The first one is the remote electronic participation policy, and what it does is it allows individual members, if they have either personal or medical reasons for missing the meeting in person, to participate remotely. It does have limitations on it in terms of the personal reasons. They're pretty broad, but we've identified them as family obligations or business commitments. And there's limitation in terms of how many personal meetings a member can miss for personal reasons. It's either, I think it's 25% of the number of annual meetings, which comes up to 3. The other reason is if you live more than 60 miles away from our meeting space, but we tried to calculate in that Albemarle, and I think that's somewhat impossible. So in any event, in terms of medical reasons, the policy does not require verification or an explanation. In fact, the state law discourages any type of disclosure on the record of what the medical reason is. There's no limits as to how many medical reasons can be put forth during the course of a year. So that just goes on trust. One of the things that was raised earlier this year was, what about susceptibility to COVID, or fear that I would be exposed or catch COVID if I came in? And the FOIA Council, the Freedom of Information Council for Virginia, has confirmed that that's a valid medical reason. Again, we don't have to verify it. We don't really have to inquire into it, but that's just for personal information. So that's the first policy. The second one that's included is what's called the all virtual public meetings. Oh, the one thing I'll go back in terms of today's an example, in terms of remote electronic participation, there has to be a quorum physically assembled in the meeting place. And this is a good example today where we have a quorum of 5. If we didn't have the quorum of 5, even if there was a remote participation, that wouldn't count. It's not a substitute for an all virtual meeting. That's a separate policy, and that's also provided for. This body can accept all these policies. It can accept it a la carte, so they could just do remote participation and not do all virtual public meetings. But I don't advise that. I think the all virtual public meeting creates some options for this body to use. Particularly, it can only be used in limited circumstances. The all virtual public meeting is exactly what it says. It's very similar to what we've been doing over the past 2.5 years through the pandemic. What it does is it says that if you were to call a special meeting or there's emergency circumstances, and my thought process on that is if there's like a blizzard or a snowstorm that prevents people from coming in, or the hurricanes coming through or flooding, something like that, then the board can call an all virtual public meeting. And as long as we can get notice out to the public, then we can conduct a meeting exactly been doing it during the course of the pandemic. And it has to be conducted as we've done on the pandemic. The public has to have access, and it's got to be recorded. All those sorts of things. We have the county has the technological ability to host those, so I'm not concerned about that at all. The third policy that comes into play is holding all virtual public meetings during a declared emergency or when continuity of government ordinance is in effect. And that's in there. It may not need to be in there because when we get the declared emergency or continuity of government ordinance, it authorizes all virtual meetings, but it essentially recites what we do. And so, and it does follow the amendments to the FOIA statutes under Virginia Code. So that's a summary of what's been presented. I know it's been sent to you all multiple times over the past 4 or 5 months. We do recommend that you adopt it because it gives you flexibility to not miss meetings and also to have the public participate. So that would be my summary of it. And there is a resolution that was included in the package materials. So if there's any questions, I'll entertain those. And if there's any amendments, we can entertain those also.
Any questions?
I move approval.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
No, I'm sorry, who seconded that?
I did.
Peter.
I'm trying to follow too many things at once.
All right. Juggling act here.
There. Okay,
And I noted that as unanimous, so we're good.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, are there other matters?
Do we get some remote members now?
Not today.
Not today. The plan was,
We're gonna get an electronic version of Chip.
well, the plan was to have remote, and that's why we moved it up first, but that kind of fell by the wayside, so that's okay.
Yeah, but you still needed to be here, so. Second on the agenda is other matters. Are there any other matters?
We don't have any
Anyone in the
members
public?
of the public online.
Okay.
Who could ask to participate.
Okay. Move on to the August minutes. Assuming everyone's got a chance to read them. Any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Moore,
Second.
Mr. Taylor. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
It's nice to be able to do voice votes again.
Yes.
All right.
Now for the next 2 items, I think it's the next item,
Yes.
and certainly 6. I'm conflicted out, so I'm still useful for the purpose of maintaining a quorum, so says Robert and his rules. But I'm not useful for any other purpose, except my general good looks at this meeting. Right, Peter?
Yes.
Duly accepted.
Yeah, I'll have you noted as recused on one of these two.
Thanks for the disclaimer.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Figure out where my notes. All right, so the first main item tonight is the Dudera donation. Donors are here to answer questions if needed. This was previously accepted by the authority back in August, and there are just some minor tweaks that needed the authority's action to approve. So just as a reminder, this is a property that meets the criteria. It would eliminate the easement would eliminate the 6 potential dwellings, provided that access became possible, which it could. This is a map of the property, and you've got 2 existing dwellings on the property. And no mouse pointer there. Main house, secondary house. There's 35-foot stream buffer there. And so the easement would protect a property that's in a public water supply area. has over 50 acres of prime or locally important soils. And although it's not truly adjacent to another easement, it meets another easement at a point. So here are the changes or clarifications, stop doing that, to the previous proposal. There are a couple of things here that are just clarifications for the benefit of the donors and one actual change. So in each case, the case of each of the dwellings, we just clarified that the existing basements are not counted toward the square footage. That's standard practice anyway, but we just want to make it absolutely clear because the basement on the main dwelling is partially exposed. It's a walkout basement. So it's always good to be clear about those, that you're not including those in the total above ground square footage. The actual change is that I had an error from the county records in the actual size of that secondary dwelling. Previously, we had listed as 448 square feet. It's really more like 600. And the request is to take that maximum of 1,000 and increase that to 2,500 square feet of total space. To my mind, this doesn't make any difference in the conservation values of the easement, but it does add some flexibility for the landowners. So would still recommend that you all accept the proposal, but given that there was a change in this, we needed action by the full authority. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And again, the donors are here to speak to it as well.
Scott, do you want to hear from the client? As to
Sure, yeah,
Jay's call.
as to the reason for the,
yes,
yes, thank you. This is Andrea Dudera, and she wants, this cabin, as I understand it, is located in a wooded area, not even visible from the main house. But she will speak to the reason for her request to rehear this and to increase the size of that house from 1,500 square feet to 2,500 square feet. Andrea?
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for accepting our donation. Really appreciate that. Once we do this, it's done in perpetuity. So I've been trying to think through what we might need in the future. My husband and I both have long-term health insurance. I don't want to go into a facility. I'd like to stay on the farm. So if we ever wanted to downsize, which, you know, at some point we might want to. When we built our house that we're in, the builder wanted to put an elevator in, and I said, no, the stairs would be good for us. They would keep us young. Well, there's no full bathroom and there's no bedroom on the first floor. The cabin is an 1890 log cabin we bought in Lexington, Virginia, and moved to the property. It also doesn't have a bathroom or a bedroom on the main floor. So what I did was, a number of my friends have downsized recently. So I called them all and asked for their square footage to see what they were comfortable living in. They all like their new little cottages. And I took an average of the square footage that I got from these 3 different people. And I came up with 2,500, which would allow us to do, build on, add a bedroom, a little bit more living area, a full bathroom on this cabin. Don't know that I'd ever do it. It's an amazing little 1890 cabin, but just in case, that's why I'm asking for the increase in square footage. And like Scott said, you can't see this from any of the boundary lines or virtually from any place on the property. The little blend.
great, thank you very much. Thoughts, discussion?
I don't know that that change really changes our perspective on this. Certainly would be in keeping with our historical precedent, accessory dwellings. So I don't know that it materially changes the thought process, frankly.
Right, I agree. I
Just have a question, and
Yes.
I appreciate the explanation because it makes very good sense. It's very reasonable and common sense. I did want to say, so does this make this location the only location that if something were to happen to that cabin, that would another dwelling be placed up to 2,500 square feet on the property?
It doesn't, the way it's currently written.
Yeah.
It's not written to require that location. I'm not sure that requiring that location would necessarily be the best thing to do because it is in a wooded area. There are other open areas even farther from the road that might be better for a replacement. So I'm not sure that locking it down to this location is helpful if there has to be a replacement.
Presumably the good agricultural soils are what are the open areas now. Typically, the poorer soils, they left in trees because you couldn't grow much but trees.
Yeah, I agree with Peter that I don't feel like it substantively changes what we're doing here. But I do appreciate the explanation, the thought process. For a motion,
I move that we accept the easement as proposed.
Mr. Taylor, is there a second?
A second.
All right, discussion. All right, all in favor of approving the changes?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right,
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
thank you all for the trip in.
So Scott, the minutes will, so Scott, the minutes will reflect that Sherry disqualified herself and she didn't discuss it or vote on it, right?
Correct.
Thank you, Richie.
Okay. Why don't you come up here? Apologize. I'm not really sure why Richie keeps disappearing off the screen. But if he's talking, I'll bring him back. Right. Ready to go on?
Yes, please. Let's move on to 6.
All right, so item 6 is the Strasser property. Mr. Ebeck and Mr. Strasser himself are here to answer any questions. This is a proposal that you all have seen before. And let's see. So here's a map and some basic information. It's a little over 10.5 acres. The proposal would eliminate 4 potential dwellings on the property, and it is adjacent to an existing easement authority easement. So it's located in the watershed of the South Fork Ravenna Reservoir and has over 1,100 feet of that shared boundary here with the, sorry, it's not showing here, with the adjacent easement. So the proposal was no subdivisions of the 10-acre property, the existing dwelling or its replacement up to 2,000 square feet. Otherwise, it's standard terms, and there are no proposed stream buffers because there aren't any identified streams on the property. The authority has seen this one before and has taken no action, but Mr. Ebeck and Mr. Strasser asked to have it heard again, felt it was important to give it consideration to, given that it is adjacent to an easement, it has those development rights to eliminate, that they would like the authority to reconsider and act to accept this proposal. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. I'm sure Mr. Ebeck and Mr. Strasser will as well. And I also have Spudrick down as recused from this.
So did we not accept this because it's smaller than normal? And
It's at the small end of the range of the easements we've accepted before. It meets the acceptance criteria. It doesn't meet many, but it meets enough to be considered, which is to say that there are 2 here. the shared boundary and the location in the reservoir watershed. So it is qualified to be considered.
And it doesn't have road frontage, so how many development rights does it have?
Well, of course, Jones Mountain Road, I believe, is a private road, but roads can be upgraded. And it has 4 development rights. Actually, has 5 development rights, 4 of which would be eliminated. So those could easily be used with a fairly minor.
Is it right away or is it, do you own the access?
I own half the road and the other side. And the other half.
The other side being under conservation easement to this organization.
It's a tough one, but.
Yeah, I-
I
Right, Mr. Evac.
I would like to introduce my client, Peter Strasser. He is the second generation owner of this property. He grew up on this property and it means a great deal to him. From my experience with this organization and the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, we have taken easements as small as 5 acres, where development rights were given up. So I think that 10 acres is certainly qualified, as Scott has just said. And without my gassing anymore, I want to have Peter Strasser, and he has some photographs that he will pass around, and he'll argue his case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Forbes, and thank you, everybody, for giving me an opportunity to talk before you. As Forbes mentioned, I inherited this property from my parents. I grew up here. They bought the first parcel of this in 1963 when I was 9 years old. And a lady named Frances Haselmeyer, who owned Jones Mountain, who started parceling it off bit by bit during the 1960s because she intended, and she did, to move to Florida. So she wanted to maximize her potential profit off the place. My parents ended up buying 3 of the parcels. The 4th one they did not get. I was down at the very bottom of the road. But the 3 choice ones are the ones they got, and those are the ones that are along the ridge line. The view from this property is what's so unusual about this property. And I have some pictures, which I did 360. The one marked front and back views. The one that's the front view shows what I'm talking about. The one that's the back view is what is shared with the easement that you see on here. Then I also did the left and right views of the property also. I've had real estate agents, well, let me backtrack. My mother always said to me that if we need money, we could sell, as you well noted, 4 lots off this property. And she always said, you can advertise if you ever wanted to sell this house, as the house is worth $1 million. I mean, the house is free, but the view is $1 million. And I've had real estate agents come out and look at this, and they say the same thing. They say, we cannot price this property. People would pay up to $3 million for that view. And so therefore, I have an emotional attachment to this place. My father's practically dying words to me were, never sell this property, keep it intact. Well, I can do that because I have an emotional attachment and because I want to carry out my father's wishes. But my children don't. And even if my children wanted to, if they needed the money, even they sold it as one parcel, the next person who buys it has 0 emotional attachment and has the potential to make a lot of money. So that's what I want to avoid happening. I want this property to stay intact in one piece. That was my parents' intent in the 1960s. And I would like to really carry that out into perpetuity, that 4 other properties don't go there, that some developer will charge at least $3 million for having that particular view. And somebody makes a lot of money off of it. I see that all over Albemarle County. I left after law school from Washington Lee and went out and lived in New Orleans for the last 30-some years. And I come back every year, at least 2 or 3 times a year. And I've now settled back here. And I've just seen so many properties plopped down on farms where I used to go, where I knew the people who lived there, and they turned into subdivisions. I just do not want to see that happen to Jones Mountain.
Thank you.
Do you own any of the adjacent land that is not under conservation easement?
No, I own the entire 10 acres, which I want to go under easement.
But that adjacent property that,
The property on this side.
yeah,
That was just recently purchased by somebody who lives in Alexandria, and they're building a house on it on the far side. I think they bought 15 acres, but that's it.
That big red building that's coming up?
That red building is a barn.
Okay.
so just to be clear, the contiguous land to this easement we're talking about, it, you don't own any of those other parcels.
So I own what you see encapsulated in red there.
I would interject that the farm across the street is Marrodale, which many of you know. It was the McNeely farm. It's, I put that easement on a number of years ago. And then the eastern boundary, that farm, that acreage, 33 acres is owned by people named Leboutier, whom I don't know.
Yeah, and I've met them, and they told me that they are only under the easement allowed to build a house right on Millington Road. So pretty much where Millington Road is. That's where the house would be. So there's absolutely no dwellings going to be put or can ever be put on the land which is adjoining us.
Mr. Strasser, you said that your parents were able to buy 3 parcels.
Right.
So,
They're all
where-
combined together.
oh, and that they're all in this 10 acre.
Yes.
Oh, I
We
see.
combined them.
I see. So in your photos, these are lovely. Thank you. I love pics. The back of the property, so this is like a westward view, I assume.
That's looking out west, correct?
Okay, because the house is up there at the edge. Let's look back, and this is,
That's where that's the road that separates the easement and my property. So my property's on the left and the easement property is on the right.
okay,
And that's the point that I'm trying to make. If one would put more properties on ours, up to 4, you would put them exactly in the same spot on top of the ridge where my house is, because that gives you the maximum of the view. The view is practically 35 miles out over the Blue Ridge Mountains.
so it would almost be, if you were to say, I have hypothetically 4, placements for houses, you would just see them coming right off the road, just bing, 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 bing.
If
That's
I
one
were a
thing.
developer, that's where I would put them because that's how I can get maximum charge and profit.
Right,
Or
right.
again, the view.
It'd probably be visible from Garth Road also, in terms of the scenic impact.
So your thought of doing this, obviously putting it under conservation easement, taking away the 4 hypotheticals and the house being limited to the 2,500 square feet, I guess.
2,000.
Yeah, 2,000. Oh, okay, so you're really putting some, you're
Well-
really clamping down.
Well,
Good for you.
it's a combination of growing up here and just loving Albemarle County. I always thought the sun rose instead of Albemarle County. I've been all over the world. I was in foreign service and nothing is like here. And so it just hurts me to see it chopped up. And I don't want my little slice of it getting chopped up too after I'm gone.
I think even from the conservation value that the small size at first, when we looked at this, in my mind kind of worked against it, but then also picturing 4 additional houses on that. 4 more wells, 4 more septic fields, the Millington Rivers not far away. It just seems like natural resource wise, it's also something worth to protect.
In a way, it meshes well with this other easement because with trying to point one way and look another, this easement adjacent was set up so that the dwelling would be up in this open area and this wooded area which drains to the river, not directly, but
Close enough.
it's a steep wooded area above the river, and that was all protected. So again, limiting the number of dwellings up here. Some of it drains this way, but some of it does drain that way, and it helps with the integrity of that.
You had a whole.
So just speaking for myself, I normally would have some heartburn on an easement of this size, but in densely eased areas, 10 acres can make all the difference in the world, especially when you're what originally it's stunning to me to go out Garth Road versus what Garth Road looked like when I
Yes,
was in college, when there were dinosaurs. But that's obviously prime development land, and so eliminating 4 division rights and restricting the size of the house to 2,000 feet to me is a worthy conservation outcome, just given the context of the area. If this were middle of southern Albemarle, I might feel differently, but given its location, I think it's an important.
What's the elevation approximately where the house is?
I couldn't tell you what it is, but I mean, I have no idea. But the nice thing about it is we are above the trees. So therefore, when you look out over the view, you're looking out way out over the treetops, straight onto, you can see as far as Winterberry.
And vice versa.
But then also the nice thing is the house itself has a very, very low profile. So and I painted it, I've spent the last year renovating it and trying to put it back to the way it was back in the 1960s. And I painted it gray and green, so it blends in. You cannot even see it. When you're driving on Garth Road, you cannot see the house at all.
Looks like the house is between 760 and 770, and the top of that point up here is about 780.
Wow, that is high. That surprises me. Even more reason. Yeah.
Well, the protection that this affords the adjacent easements is to be minimized by them.
Yeah.
So I move to accept.
As proposed.
Is that a motion?
Yeah.
I'll second it.
Okay, Scott, did you get that?
Yep.
Is there further discussion? Take it to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition?
And I'm out again, don't forget.
Not again. What a hell
And you
you
didn't
are.
say a thing.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Strasser, thank you for
Very
your
kind of you.
donation.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. That
Yes.
really helped a lot.
Thank you.
Mr. Reebok, thank you very much.
I'm done.
About time.
So
I'm curious, you said you lived in New Orleans for a while. I lived there for a little bit.
You
It's
did?
a unique, well, I went to grad school at Tulane and then I stayed and worked for Hibernia Bank for about 3 years,
Oh,
you know, and then, yeah, moved to Charlotte, but special place, but good place to visit, not a good place to live.
Well, unfortunately, right now it's got the highest murder rate in the United
Yeah,
States.
I was held up 3
Again?
times at gunpoint on the street. Yeah, I decided,
You
my
what?
mother said it's time to get out, your options are running.
There is a carjacking every single day, at least one on Labor Day. There are 7 carjackings. There's a murder every day, if not more, and the potholes are out of control. And the mayor is going on first class and business class air trips to
Yeah.
Riviera, to Singapore and whatnot.
I was there when the sheriff was Harry Lee,
Oh, okay.
big Hawaiian guy, and the DA was, his son's the
His
singer.
son's a singer, Connick.
Yeah, Harry
Yeah,
Connick
yeah.
Senior was the
Yeah.
DA. They were a great pair. They were really interesting.
Well, my last 3 years there, I was the United States Attorney in New Orleans.
Well, you saw a lot.
So. That's not my church.
Gosh.
Love to hear those stories over the beer.
And the
Sure.
governor, of
I'll-
course,
I'll turn the light on.
Louisiana 20 years ago
Thank you.
was
Thank
Edwin Edwards.
Mhm.
I prosecuted him. And
Oh, wow.
he was prosecuted once in 85, then we did it in the year 2000 and convicted him second time around. But as he always said, you people just don't understand how we do business in Louisiana.
Scary.
Thanks for coming in.
It was so nice to meet you.
Likewise,
Thank you.
thank you.
thank you, Walter.
All right, Monty donation proposal.
I like the name. Timon.
So this is a new proposal for an easement donation on almost 73 acres on Clark Road. Meets all the acceptance criteria and eliminates 5 potential dwellings. Real focus here, of course, is the Mormons River, which is a scenic river and highly important aquatic habitat. The one thing I should point out is the oddity here is this little box in the middle is not part of the proposal. It's owned by somebody separate. So just to clarify that. Just to give you an idea of the property, the floodplain area down here is deciduous woods, but above these slopes, it gets into a lot of pine plantations. So that affects the way the terms of the easement are laid out. So the important resources include over 10.5 acres of 100-year floodplain. It's in the county's scenic streams zoning overlay district and is a Virginia scenic river, which leads into the riparian terms I'll talk about in a minute. Almost 70 acres of important forestry soils. I mentioned the Mormons River Stream Conservation Unit, and also is, and I'll show you in the map again in a second, it's designated as a riverine wetland in the National Wetlands Inventory. So the proposal is no subdivisions, one dwelling up to 4,500 square feet. Otherwise, it's fairly standard. No land clearing for agriculture in the riparian buffer, no ponds in the riparian buffer. The way I laid out the proposed buffer in this case is a little different than what we usually do, but I've cleared it with the donors and their attorney. The way the topography works in this property, the floodplain area is,
Everything in blue,
yeah,
is that a FEMA 100-year floodplain?
this is the,
Wait, the buffer's in blue.
this is almost exactly the new FEMA floodplain. The reason I say it that way is the old FEMA floodplain goes up onto these slopes. It's not very accurate.
So they have to factor the dam in, obviously, but
What I did,
I presume they have.
what I did here is I looked at the draft FEMA floodplain, which is still under review.
Yes,
And it's basically this shape you see here, but the way I mapped this was to just go by the 564 foot
fair,
elevation.
fair enough.
It didn't make sense to do a single width buffer in a place where it's the floodplain woods are very narrow at this end and are very wide at this end. If you look at the National Wetlands Inventory, it actually shows the wetland coming here, turning and coming down this old channel here. So there's a flood channel or an old channel.
Yeah.
You can see
In
it right
high
here.
water, it
Yeah.
comes in and it
Yeah.
almost bisects the
Yeah.
water.
Yeah. So
That's
this is-
probably canoed when it was doing that.
So is that 500 feet at its widest point? Stream buffer.
about that, yeah. It's a little less. But
And it's steep right there, where it comes down to, it's a really steep.
Well, when
crest.
they go in to cut those pine trees, which they will at some point, be happy to have that.
So
we didn't include proposed terms limiting any timbering because obviously a lot of this is pine plantation that's going to be cut at some point.
Has to be good.
But that wouldn't be possible in this buffer area. So there's a little bit of pine in there, not very much. So on balance, I think it works.
not much this side of that power line that's accessible,
Yeah,
except for that bottom.
no, they're just gonna stick to the big stands.
You might want to just cut the pines, the planted pines out, Scott, because they'll get cut and you'll have a little violation unless your language does something interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if that's a good thought. I mean, just to make that.
And just
an
bring the
exception
buffer
to
down
buffers.
below the pines and save yourself a world of headaches.
No.
And the forestry language would
Comfortable with that, but
require that reforestation would be native species as opposed to monoculture, is that right?
that's what we've done before.
And
Yeah,
that
and
would
we
be,
could just add to the proposed terms that the exception to the prohibition of timbering in the buffer is that any planted pines can be cut as long as they are replanted to deciduous forest species.
and that would include the entire property.
No, that would just be in the buffer area because we're not prohibiting timbering in the rest of the property. So we're only really concerned about those kind of border cases like Jerry mentioned, where
Can you,
they're cutting the pines, they come 10 feet into the buffer. Where they shouldn't.
But we have required in certain forestry language, a more balanced approach to reforestation. rather than just pines, I believe. Am I right? That's
Only in certain cases. A lot of them were just typical farm preservation easements. We don't do that. There have been a few cases where there were properties that had a decent growth of deciduous woods and then one easily identifiable patch of pines. And we've written terms that said you can cut those pines, but then you have to replant to native deciduous species and leave it.
so this is on a pretty significant knoll. Am I right?
Yeah, there's some steepish slopes there, particularly on the left-hand side. And I presume that's all pines to the left of the in-hole.
This is,
Yeah, and what,
most of this is, it's very scattered through here.
what
some of those might
what
be
about
cedars.
below the power line?
On the right hand side.
There,
Yeah,
what's
that's all
that?
pines in there.
That's all pines?
This, I kind of suspect some of this may maybe just be cedars or something. It doesn't look like part of the plantation to me on that slope.
And I've been back below that power line, and I'm not sure why those pines are there, because there are no skid roads down there. You know, I can't,
Well, they may have never cut it before.
yeah.
And just to be, the parcel that is not included is owned separately. There are no.
The history of it is they were long-term tenants and convinced the previous property owner to sell them 5 acres.
Hmm.
That donut hole.
Yikes.
So that's 5 acres a centerpiece.
Mhm. It's separate ownership, no divisions.
And how do they access it? Do they own the road or?
The right of way.
Right of way?
The right of way through that pipestone.
And
It's
does
actually
the,
part of the parcel.
does the owner of this entity own land nearby or adjacent?
No,
Not adjacent.
not adjacent. Wesley Chapel Road. Just a small house.
What does he use it for now? Just,
Their intention
Timber.
is they put mountain bike trails in, and I think, is there mention of a pavilion in there at some point? And basically, what they conveyed to me is that they actually want to be able
I
to
like that oblique view.
let school groups and almost turn it into educational opportunity.
And our template allows for that.
Right.
Can you go back to that oblique aerial?
Try.
There, no, yes. You can see the pine trees much better now.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So
Really-
this color. This is pine plantation, this is deciduous.
Right.
So deciduous pines, this is all pines, you can tell it's in rows.
Yeah.
and that line, that demarcation almost follows that floodplain overlay.
Yeah, it's very
Well,
close.
You can see this is where that side channel, which is dry most of the time, comes around here to the old stream channel.
But Sherry's right, if you just drop that down to here,
Jay, is this property visible from the road or?
No, as a crow flies, it's maybe a 3/4 of a mile from the property we just put under easement. It's along Clark Road.
that's that gravel road that's.
It's the section of the road where the road is dropped down quite a bit.
Yeah, there's like
You can see
along,
the slopes there.
along the road
You can't
there,
really see in very well.
bank's probably 5 or 6 feet high.
It's not a very well-traveled road, and I take it sometimes to go up to Butterfields, and I don't have a sense of there being a scenic problem with, if the pines were cut or something like that. I mean, I think you have to be real careful with those kind of restrictions. Where you would say you can't plant pines ever again. There actually are some land management reasons why. There's a new program at Department of Forestry called the Hardwood Initiative. And I was talking to the guy who runs it the other day, and because we were talking about at what point we should ever limit timbering, and if so, how, and if so, what kind. And he was saying if you have a tract of hardwoods that are kind of compromised, by vines or invasive species and all that kind of stuff. That sometimes the only way to get a decent stand back is to clear cut the hardwoods, plant a rotation of pine trees, and then cut the pine trees and start from scratch. And it takes 50 years, but these easements are forever. And
Just to be
I have a little bit of trepidation about restricting land management like that.
To be clear, the only place we're restricting forestry is in the riparian buffer.
But I was just commenting on, I think the general thought, should more be restricted on this parcel?
I think the landowners had requested that we not do more than the usual requirements for timbering
Yeah, okay.
outside of the buffer because they do need, they need
Okay.
to cut and manage. So
Well, that would, tee into what I was just saying, but I think there are times for that, but this may not be one of them.
I just have heartburn with these pine monocultures, which have a relatively short life. And to the extent that the scenic view shed is part of the easement criteria, it necessarily means that they're going to be harvested frequently, much more so than hardwoods in all probability. And
Yeah, I don't see this one as scenic being
I
at all.
hear you.
I mean, I
get
go
it.
up and down that road and I can't even think of,
You don't know the
you can
pines.
see there.
what you look at, frankly, is Tucked Away Farm, which is apparently across the road, which is a lovely old dairy farm.
You can't really see into very much of this property.
And this just seems like a,
Wall.
wall of woods.
Yeah.
But I get it, Peter. There are times when that is a very concerning thing, and we've thought about it in the view shed of the park and times like that.
No, that makes good logical sense.
So have we clarified what we want to do with the riparian buffer? Leave it as is or drop it down to that?
If you want to bump it
line.
down to the, what was it, 560? What's the
Yeah, we
contour?
got 4-foot contours, so we could drop it to 560.
So is it a linear buffer or is it based on FEMA standards?
It's based, well,
Elevation.
it's based on an elevation, but that elevation is a very close match to the revised FEMA floodplain.
Okay, so it's based on some number, not.
Yeah.
Fine.
Well,
Yep.
I make a motion that we
Oh,
accept
I got a
these-
point of. Can I ask for a clarification? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, so the motion's going to be to amend the proposal to, in terms of the riparian buffer, to run at the 560-foot elevation level. Does that mean there's not going to be any restrictions in terms of removing the pines and replacing them with native hardwood in the riparian buffer?
There'd be no forestry in the record.
No forestry in the buffer. Okay. That works.
But I would suggest that you just, when you go and do your baseline report, just ground truth it, and go along the edge where the pines stop
Yeah,
and make that your buffer down below. Presumably, there are probably not pines in the actual physical buffer.
right.
Yes, too.
The foresters are probably sometimes the most practical people in the room. And they may not put the thing where they can't get them back out again.
Yeah, I mean, as long as the forestry terms allow them to do management. I mean, you might need to cut diseased trees or manage. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
that's in
it's not a cut prohibition
Yeah,
entirely.
that's not the way the template. riparian
that's not
buffer
our
is
standard.
written.
Yeah, I mean, it's your standard buffer language, right?
Yeah.
Just as no dead disease,
The only thing
dead
is-
disease dying stuff in the way of a trail.
The only variations from the template are ones I've put up here, which is
Yeah, okay.
taking out permission for ponds, dams, and vehicle crossings. So they aren't related to timbering. They're because this is a scenic river and a probably important wetland in that floodplain. those things didn't seem appropriate.
And I'm thinking now about the mountain biking trails. Are they already
Trails are permitted
established?
within these buffers.
They're there.
A mountain bike is not a vehicle, last we checked. Even if it has a motor on
And it looks at the default buffer language allows for trails, so.
The trails themselves have water breaks, they're banked. Pretty well engineered in terms of erosion control
For now.
for now.
How long have they owned this property? Do we know?
Almost a year, well, no, almost 2 years.
it. Who actually owns it? Is
Jay and Janet McDonald. They live across from Chapel Spring, or I don't know, what is it, Chapel Springs now? Right next to Donnie Landhart's old place.
I'll go back to making my motion.
All right.
I'll second it.
The motion being that.
Do you also sign blank pieces of paper? I've got one
I
for you.
don't, in fact. The motion being that you adjust the stream buffer upon the ground truthing of it and just, put it at the low edge of the pines.
So take that as a motion to limit the stream buffer to 560 feet or to a more appropriate elevation found by staff in field verification.
Yeah.
But otherwise accepting the proposal as is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that whatever you pick is the line that's measurable and it follows a single number contour, because otherwise it's too hard to.
Unless you want to GPS the whole thing.
Well, I'm probably going to have to borrow a GPS and go out there and find an elevation out there.
But just don't set yourself up for a problem. That's all I'm asking.
Okay, all right, further discussion? Take it to a vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposition? Here we go. Thank you. Moving on to St. Margaret's.
It's. All right, the last item for today is another easement that you all have seen before. This was approved with some minor changes to the proposal back in May. And the donors have come back with a couple of minor requested changes due to some updated information.
That we were talking about building setbacks from.
Yes.
We went
From
from
22.
500 to 400.
Now, is this the same Margaret's house tract,
Yes, it's
not
the
the
old-
other tract?
It's the old house.
Okay, all
Well,
right.
it's everything.
No, it was
No.
cut into.
I tried to do an easement on St. Margaret's with the previous owner, and it was twice as big as this, or more.
Oh, I thought you meant the place where the farm manager's house is.
And it sold in 2 blocks, as I understood.
Yeah, there's the other piece, if I remember correctly, the other piece, come on, mouse, is over here.
That's right.
It was the first time I'd ever seen an irrevocable trust block an easement. And that's why we didn't do it. It's too bad.
Can you go back to that map? I'm turn around. So there's Louisa Road.
There's Lisa Road. There's the railroad crossing.
And where's and the house is right
That circle.
cut.
Yeah, didn't we
Okay.
have it at one point, like coming back into the circle? Like,
You had the 500 went all the way to the front porch.
yeah.
So you all, in looking at it before, had approved 400, which is what this map shows, and allowing structures up to 500 square feet in that setback. Which is consistent with what you've done. So the requested change here, first, the size of the dwelling was, the information they had on the size of the dwelling the county had was outdated. They've had an architect actually survey the building. Turns out it's bigger than what we had. So the actual size is bigger. And as I understand, it, they are building on an exterior porch that they think in some future date, somebody might want to enclose. So as a porch, it doesn't count against them. If it's enclosed, it does. So that's about 1,000 square feet or a little more, 1,200. So they're asking for a total of 8,000 to accommodate, one, the possibility of that porch being enclosed, and two, any minor adjustments needed for perpetuity. And so I've added the previous changes about the small structures and the 400-foot setback rather than 500. The previous action by the authority stated that if there were building envelopes, those could be approved by staff. I know the donors were trying very hard to get me the building envelopes before today, and it didn't happen, or at least I didn't receive them. So if we could do that action the same way, from what I understand, their intention is to put the envelopes.
What's a reasonable size for an envelope on a parcel
Well,
that's?
I mean, we don't, the authority doesn't typically care. We don't do envelopes, but people feel the need to do them because of IRS requirements. I think in this case, what they plan to do is just center a single circular envelope about here to encompass the two dwellings.
Okay. That's
And-
fine. Yeah.
So
Is that house eligible for the historic register?
Was it built before 1950?
Yes.
Then it's
Yeah,
it's
eligible.
like
probably
1910 or
is because it's in the historic district.
It is such I wish we had photographs of these things. It's a pretty substantial, impressive house, as I remember.
It also has weird little additions and things on it like that.
Yeah, it looks a little bit like the Meadows. It's that 1910, like
Yeah.
with the columns and
Right.
the,
Yeah,
Pretty cool
yeah.
model.
yeah. And it sits nicely on that knoll. So the other residence is that black box at the curve in the
Yeah,
back.
that's right.
Okay.
I just say, living out there, this is important easement because the encroachment to column is significant and it's really small houses and that's still sort of a protected enclave. And this is right on the border of it. So there is significant demand for housing out there. And I think this is an important easement.
But I do think if we have historic properties, we need to be mindful that it's perhaps potentially an inconsistent use in the view of the IRS not to do anything to keep a historic house from being pushed over. It
gonna
sounds like
say.
it's a little later than I thought it might have been, but just FYI.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a struggle for the last few years for this group.
Yeah.
Having gone from never doing historic preservation terms to occasionally doing them and sort of struggling with how to word them. So it's a process.
Yeah, you usually have to do less than you would because we're not competent to be historic preservation architects, so things like anti-demolition can sort of cover it, but I really hate seeing historic places pushed over, so I thought I would mention this.
Because as this reads, it's either this or it's replacement, which means you could
Yes.
Of course you can.
level it all off.
People don't think of that, and then it gets pushed over and they think, oh,
Because you don't think nobody's gonna do that, because
why
it
did
doesn't
those
make
damn
sense.
people
to
protect
them,
that?
yeah. What are your
Those-
suggestions?
Richie?
Oh, I was gonna ask Scott if the donor is amenable to no willful destruction or demolition clause. We have some, I know Sherry has shared a number of clauses or provisions with us that don't require that we do historic preservation evaluations or that sort of thing. It just kind of puts a limit on the donor from making certain changes or doing things to the property.
And at least the language that we have says without approval, so you could get approval, and my beef with a certain organization that I know is that they have given approval way too readily. But
I think that makes sense.
if the
and
people would accept it, I would feel that we had done a more responsible job. It's in a historic district at the very least. I'm sure it's a contributing structure. How could it not be?
Yeah.
Well, I agree, and I like the way that you introduced that, because I didn't know how you would do that, because when you drive down Louisa Road, it catches your eye. It has a beautiful gated stone entrance. It sits kind of at an angle on the hill, and it looks really lovely. So you would like to think it's going to be there, it's going to be there. And if you want to grow it to 8,000 feet, it's nice to know that that's what it's going to be to some extent. I think that's a good trade-off.
In a house of that size, adding 1,500 feet is not that big a deal.
Well, particularly if it's only enclosing a portion that's
Yeah.
already.
But
there.
if they tear it down and go build 8,000 square feet someplace else, then it's a whole
Or
different.
they could reorient it, it would probably the landscape, like,
Well, they'd have to build it inside whatever envelope. Gets it.
I mean, they could move it closer, they could push over what there is, they could put in a very incompatible structure.
So-
Or two, I think you could put two in there.
is there non-demolition, because we've done this before, haven't we? It's like non-demolition word.
Yeah, because I remember giving Richie the language for something else.
Yeah.
Richie said no willful destruction. whatever.
We have a fairly undetailed clause, and I know I've done it with Lee Rasmussen in a prior deed, and it's pretty broad. This is no willful demolition. And as Sherry says, without some form of approval. I mean, the one thing we're always dealing with, is if there's a lightning strike and it burns and that sort of thing, we're kind of helpless at that point.
Acts of God.
Yeah, that's usually addressed
That
there.
would be included, right? You'd get a pass for that, in other words.
Yeah, so that's with permission.
And the language actually will say that you can replace the structure in terms of a natural disaster, act to God type of
Right.
Okay.
reason for its removal.
I think
But
the
it's just a
wording
nice break on somebody before they go willfully and wantonly buggering up a historic structure.
And so is the amendment that we will add that term if the donor agrees? Because
Yes.
it's not part of the original proposal.
No, I know. They want something from us, so I'm just thinking.
So how do we
Yeah.
want to word that? Do we want to make it a condition for acceptance or
I mean, I would be tempted to do that because the provision is so weak that we're talking about adding. They can always bring it back and
Yeah, I would agree, because I'd rather have a discussion before you just find out later that it's gone.
Right.
yeah, I mean, if they have the absolute ability to say, nah, any restriction is just an extra restriction. If we feel this restriction has validity of any sort, we should probably say, it's kind of, you brought it back, we discussed it, the house is getting bigger, but we just wanted, this is sort of a tit for tat type of, it does add some protection to a house that 6,500 is a little bit different animal than 8,000. And it would be nice if it was added on to something lovely rather than a brand new architectural idea.
Yeah, and I still, this might be, they might get it and just think, wow, we hadn't thought about that. And realize we're just doing our job here.
And also the IRS, for those of you who don't follow this sort of thing, has a thing called inconsistent use. And if there are sort of existing things that are not protected resources, they can deem that the easement allows inconsistent use, and that can put the easement in jeopardy of being not an acceptable easement.
Does this take us in general as a body more into the historical protection? I mean, I feel like we've done it to an extent. But, I think if we looked at ourselves across the board, there might be some gaps in there of historic properties that we may not have.
Could be. I mean, this is one of those properties it's well maintained, it's impressive.
been there for a long time?
I had not been
Right.
sure it was visible from the road, although the entrance is very sort of significant. There are times when you don't dare do it. If you've got a very old barn that's in bad shape.
Right.
You know, there can be reasons why you'll just let it lie maybe. But in a historic district with a house that may be potentially eligible in its own right, and certainly a contributing structure,
And it's got a scenic.
and
impact.
something that's visible from the road, what's not to like?
Perfect, very fair point.
Right, so what's our,
So the
Our
proposal
motion.
would be to accept the revised proposal, provided that the deed require that there be no willful demolition of the main house without holder approval, except in the case of casualty, which Lee tells me. is the letter.
Don't write any of that down, use Richie's language.
is that your motion, Sharon?
That is my motion. To use the historic preservation language for the house, which is basically no demolition without approval, that we have used in the past. It's a sort of template.
Richie, you following that?
Yes, I'm following that.
All right, didn't know where to look.
I don't know if I can be seen or not, but it sounds like I can be heard.
Yeah, we see you, Richie. Hey, man.
And,
I'll second the motion.
all right, Mr. Taylor seconding. Further discussion on this?
Call the question.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Nice work, folks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Richie. All right, is there any new business? Good. Any old business?
I just want to be assured of one thing. And that is that on these new easements for this year that we're doing baseline reports
Yes.
in a timely and responsible manner.
Said yes
Well,
quickly to the first part.
It depends on what you mean by timely. They're getting done before the easements go to recordation.
Okay, that's
They're not
timely. That's
necessarily
perfect.
done as soon as the donors would like me to get out there.
No, I'm not worried about them so much as I want to make sure that they're not being done a year after recordation or such things as that.
No, that would be disaster.
And, you know,
We're doing them. Usually because of other workload, I'm having to put them off until we get close to recordation because I don't want to spend the time on something that fails.
okay. But we're doing them every time and we're doing them before recordation. That's all I want to know.
So what is our ability or capacity to push for having hired interns or support for you or like, I'm not sure.
We're fine to do it. I was partway through the process of setting up the hiring and I've just got swamped with development projects.
Okay,
That should, I hope, back off soon and I'll get back to the process. I started with HR after they reorganized themselves and actually got me some help
okay.
to figure out how to do that.
Is there a budget? You know, like
This body has money.
We have a lot of money from the
right,
tax thing.
and we're still putting away our, what, 10,000 a year?
Well, yeah, this is a slide I had put in for the August meeting. I think it was,
Okay,
but so it's a little bit out of date, but it won't be much different. The restricted balance of, come on now, 60,000 is the legal defense reserve.
okay,
The remainder is this 341,000, which is all again from the state monitoring funds. That's what would be used to pay an intern or a temporary employee to do the field monitoring. So what I was trying to set up, I'm trying to go a little broader than just the student interns we've used in the past and get somebody who can do 25 to 30 hours a week and has some sort of field experience, whether they're a planning student, architecture student, environmental science student, or just a local person with the right experience.
okay.
So I hope to get back on that very soon.
I think we have a lot of like interns or various people that know how to do GIS that.
Yeah.
And GPS that.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be all that hard to find somebody. It's difficult to find necessary support to make the hiring process work. I've gotten that now, and now as soon as I can get my plate cleared, I'll get back on this.
Is there any help you need from us?
Moment, but I'll let you know.
That was kind of all the end new business there. I'd say.
Yeah, maybe in the next meeting, we can give the legal defense fund a cost of living increase.
That won't go very far, will it?
Yeah.
No, I want to move more money over into that because there's too much money floating in that
Ether.
general one and
Right.
not enough. I mean, we learned really quick on that Turner Mountain thing that you can get hamstrung really fast by not having enough money to pay for legal representation if the county decides it's not going to do it.
I mean, while we can, should we, as a group, decide put 20 in?
I think the agenda is such that we've gone past it.
Yeah. Good.
So let's think
Okay.
about it next time.
Okay. Do we have a motion to move? Yeah, or more. Do we have a motion to move to adjourn?
So made. Requires no second.
All right. All in favor?
Thank you.
All right.
And thank you. for
Thank
your
you all very
patience.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good
See you,
Rich,
weekend.
thank you very much. Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you all for your patience with the technology.
Scott, you did a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done.
Hey, Is there
Appreciate it.
some kind of significance to the fact that we had a stone wall with this thing?
I wasn't gonna bring that up when I first came in, but
That's just my just.
All right, good. Well, how you been, Peter?
I'm well, thank you, Sherry. I shall